Yo, hey guys, how you doing? Today I want to be talking about some of my favorite books. This is completely improvised. I don't have anything planned, and we'll just see how this goes. So it was actually my girlfriend who got me sort of, not back into reading, but kind of made me look at books a different way. When I was like really young, I was the type of reader who I read The Hobbit, but then I just kind of opened it and flicked through it, and then mainly got attached to like the lore behind it and stuff. I liked the idea of books more than the actual process of reading books themselves. Figured that I kind of needed a new attack or new direction to approach books from, and for me that was Japanese books. And it's not because of like anime or anything like that, I'm not really into that, but Studio Ghibli is a big part of it. I was looking for more of a emotional reading experience, not necessarily for the glitz and glamour of the story, but rather the emotional intricacies in the book itself. And then, after looking at like top 50 lists of like greatest Japanese novels, I ultimately ended up reading Snow Country by Yasunari Kawabata, who has since become my favorite author of all time. I've never had an author whose books I've read so religiously. Homie is just a great writer. He captures that like delicate mood so well. And this was, I think, the perfect kind of gateway drug into like the gentle imagery that floods his books. So this one tells the story of Shimamura, who is a kind of an enigma, to be honest. You never really find out any more than he is a man. You don't find anything out about his family life, really, just his in-the-moment internal dialogue. Basically, the story follows how he, maybe like twice a year, goes up to this like snowy region of Japan, which is kind of introduced as the snowiest region on Earth. And we love absolutes because it just makes things more interesting. And he basically meets this geisha, and it details their like love affair, but kind of a love that never was. And it's just really interesting the way he guides the narrative, because what can you really do with that? It's really bare bones, and yet the words are so crystal-like and they're so transparent, yet they have this shine to them that it's up for the reader to decipher. And then after reading Snow Country and being like, oh my fucking god, this is maybe the greatest thing I've ever read, I needed to read more of Kawabata, and I ended up reading The Master of Go, which may even top Snow Country for me. It's basically semi-autobiographical, because Kawabata writes about his experience detailing a Go match from his perspective as a journalist, and you follow the last Go match of a great traditional master as he goes up against a new young modern prodigy, kind of representing the traditional and the new evolving modern Japan following World War II. That just sets up such a wonderfully articulate book. Really interesting. Maybe his most emotionally delicate. Yeah, and the cover is so sick. I mean, goddamn. Then I read Thousand Cranes, which might be my least memorable Kawabata read, but I feel like the complexity of the relationships in the book wouldn't be the same if it wasn't for the complexity of the exposition that kind of the reader has to decipher for themselves. Really interesting, kind of fucked up. It's about a guy whose father had a bunch of affairs, and then following the death of his father, he hooks up with his father's mistress, who is trying to also urge her daughter to court the guy. And then what happens is that the guy hooks up with his father's mistress. Basically, she's like living her suppressed sexual fantasy with the guy's father through the guy, but that's his son. So you're like, what the fuck? And I think no Kawabata book captures that fucked up like love dodecahedron, as well as Beauty and Sadness, which follows basically the love affair of an author and a painter, who the author, being around late 20s, had a sexual relationship, the painter, when she was a 16-year-old girl, while he had wife and kids. So yeah, this is maybe his most fiction-y book, just because of the absurdity and perhaps some of the violent bits. But yeah, Beauty and Sadness is still just as gorgeous and still has that Kawabata style, which is so delicate but also powerful in its delicacy. So it creates kind of a loop of delicacy and immense emotional impact. And then I also read Sound of the Mountain, which is another dabble with death, through an old aging character, perhaps in an attempt to understand time and age for himself. And The Sound of the Mountain is just gorgeous. To be honest, for the first 40 pages, I was like, he's kind of flopping. After that, it became one of my favorite books by him because it's just so intricate, once again, with the relationships. He's so good at exploring family dynamics, which is interesting because he grew up with like his stepmom's grandmother and he had no living family members by the age of like 9. So I wonder what the relationship with that is. Yeah, but he explores family dynamics so well. And I think that's one of his gifts in writing, so he makes it so impactful. Sound of the Mountain. And I consider my knowledge in Japanese literature quite minimal. I'm still in the early stages of exploring. I still have a bunch of Mishima books I'm yet to read. So far I've only read The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea, and that is incredible. And I have Spring Snow and The Temple of the Golden Pavillion on my shelf. I just need to read them. I do want to talk about Mishima though, now that we're on the topic. Confessions of a Mask. Also, absolute whore for Penguin Modern Classics. Please get in touch, you little penguin. This is, I think, one of 3 books that Mishima wrote about sexuality, and more specifically homosexuality, trying to understand that concept for himself in a cultural environment at the time was really unforgiving and stigmatic towards homosexual relationships. And while he never officially declared it, and his wife declared it well after his death, but I guess you would, wouldn't you, if you were his wife? He's consistently writing from the perspective of perhaps a tortured young male who is trying to grasp this sense of lust and love and trying to separate the two, however that might be. And I think his fusion of violence and grotesque violence at that with sexuality kind of makes you wonder whether these are confessions of sort or perhaps personal manifestos of the soul of his sexuality. Because I feel like if you write 3 books about a guy who's kind of struggling with accepting his sexuality in a world where it would be deemed as sacrilegious, he is personifying it as really violent entities. You would think the author would be dealing with something like that. Perhaps by the 3rd book you'd be like, wait a minute, maybe you're gay. It sounds kind of gay to me. But I think when you combine that with Mishima's fascination for the body and for the soul and for the relationship between the self, the world outside, and the body, it does offer a counter argument in which he truly was just an excavator of the soul. And I think that's both wonderfully interesting interpretations of his work, and Mishima is still an author I would love to explore and perhaps make another video on. And with that being said, if you enjoyed it, please give it a like, just because I have no other way of knowing if you guys enjoyed this or not. I love talking about books. I can talk about pretty much anything. And I would love to keep doing it. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you later.